Okay, for everybody who's here and hopefully here is online, thank you for coming. And my job is really just to kind of give a broad introduction to the real star of the show, which is Andrea, and in particular the work he has done on integrating the Share-VDE platform and FOLIO, which is an ongoing project. So what we're showing here is kind of a snapshot of what we've done so far and what the direction is. And the thing I wanted to convey to you all was why I think this is important and where I feel like it fits into the larger conversation about entity management and in particular BibFrame, I suppose, in a FOLIO context. So what I wanted to do, and just historically in terms of my work with Andrea and his team at AdCult and Casalini and AdCult and Index Data have been working together for years on sort of ideation around metadata and FOLIO, how to move forward this vision that FOLIO has of an open-ended and extensible ecosystem for bibliographic metadata. We have bid together on contracts, small and large, and we have designed and thought about things. And this is really kind of the fruit of a lot of that work that's taken place over the past 5-6 years. Going all the way back, though, to the beginning of the FOLIO project, there were a group of librarians and developers and architects sitting around the table and trying to figure out how to conceptualize this new library service platform that we were building. And there were lots of different things we were thinking about. We thought about the UI, the app-based architecture, but the thing that we probably sweated the most over and worried the most about was how to deal with bibliographic data. We knew, in my mind, that FOLIO was going to be the first ILS or LSP that was going to come onto the scene when it was pretty definitive and clear that MARC was not, for the lifetime of this platform, going to be the primary format for metadata. That something was coming, but we wasn't sure what it was or how it would work. So that left us with a really difficult challenge in terms of software design. You know, if you were to build FOLIO 15 years ago or 20 years ago, bibliographic data would have been very easy because most ILSs were built with MARC as the primary format for metadata, and you build all kinds of clever automation and configuration around that particular syntax. And people in libraries became very good at dealing with and solving different kinds of problems with MARC as a substrate. And for an even longer time, libraries have developed any number of methods and techniques and organizations and infrastructure to share bibliographic metadata using MARC records. The very first day I came to work in 1990, 2-3 years ago, I was given a tape, and I came to work in a Danish organization that provided digital IT support for university libraries in Denmark. I was given a tape with MARC records from the Library of Congress and saying, figure out how to crack this open and do something with it. And that kind of trafficking through tape or through FTP files or through OAI PMH of MARC records into union catalogs, out of shared catalogs into local silos is something we've built an awful lot of technique and culture around. We knew that it was going to be replaced with something different. And if we were to simply try to replicate that same kind of culture of shipping bunches of files around in a BibFrame environment, that would just be a mess. That would be a waste of time, because BibFrame in and of itself is not, and I'm sorry, but it's not a particularly attractive format. It's messy, it's complicated. If anything, it's harder to deal with than MARC-21 is because of the way it's structured. BibFrame, to my mind, really only makes sense when you think about it in a sharing economy, when you think about it as a tool to share the maintenance of metadata. But we didn't know what that would look like, right? We didn't know how it would impact staff workflows, what the process of whatever came after MARC cataloging would look like. We didn't know what that sharing ecology might look like, how it would evolve and change over the years. And we didn't know really what we were trying to achieve from a patron experience point of view. What were the new features that BibFrame, that entity-based metadata would achieve? I should say, entity-based description would achieve for patrons. All that stuff felt like it was up in the wild blue yonder, and it would remain so for some time. But Folio had to somehow be ready for that. And we went through months of hand-wringing and working through scenarios, thinking about electronic resources too, and the way that they're described compared to how print monographs are described, how serials are handled, and all that stuff, and trying to figure out how we architect for that in this whole new platform. So the model we ended up with was built around the inventory app that everybody, you sort of love to hate, whether you're an engineer or user of the system, because it introduces indirection in your dealing with metadata, because it's big and heavy from a maintenance standpoint. It was one of the very first apps to be developed for Folio, so it's been around for a long time. It's accrued a lot of requirements over the years. But it was meant to address this kind of challenge, all of these unknowns that Folio would face, by building in degrees of freedom in just the places we would need to address what we thought were the sort of most likely use cases, if you will. So moving towards different formats, entirely different types of data models, moving towards different models of sharing. There was a real hope amongst many of us that we would not be copy cataloging records out of union catalogs into local silos, but that we would come up, that BibFrame would push us in the direction of more collaborative environments. And we built the architecture sort of around that, and inventory is meant to fill that hub. We kind of knew, no, I say we definitely knew that inventory wasn't going to be perfect. That as much as we had thought, and we thought and designed and argued and debated, eventually we had to start coding. We had to start moving towards a system that could go into production. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to get it right. You could feel it, that we had most of it, but it wasn't going to be all there. So part of the philosophy of Folio is that everything is replaceable. Like, inventory doesn't have to be the final view in how you do bibliographic description. It's based on microservices, based on a set of apps. The challenge is that many, many other apps depend on inventory by its nature. So replacing it would not be easy, but there are levels of replacement you could do. You could fundamentally replace the UI. You could fundamentally replace the business logic that are behind the APIs. You could, if you're prepared to go and rejigger all the apps that depend on it, replace the whole thing if you wanted to. It's not baked into Folio any more than any other app in the system. So there is that. So what is the idea behind inventory? The sort of vision behind the madness? The notion was that we wanted Folio to be an app-based system where many different business needs could be met by people developing vertical applications that communicated with each other through APIs. We knew that several of those applications, and I tried to list the ones I could think of in this diagram, on this drawing. I probably have missed some, but would depend on that. And we were trying to avoid a situation where a move away from MARC would mean that each one of those would have to be rejiggered. And supporting a new data format for description in Folio would require each of those apps to be fundamentally redesigned. So the vision was that if there was a commonality that we could identify that captured most functional needs, most operational needs of a library, that we could capture in one data model and use that data model as a kind of abstraction on front of more detailed or more specialized data formats, then most apps that don't have to care about the low-level details of those more specialized formats can just worry about that one sort of abstraction format. That was the vision. The notion was that to build a course list, you might not have to worry about the 60 seconds element of a MARC record or this particular attribute of a BibFrame record, a BibFrame entity, but that there would be sort of a common set. That was the vision or the idea, the hope. Now, the set of data elements that are needed to capture that sort of union of all functional needs across common library workflows has grown over time. It's become more complex, to be sure. But still, that's been an idea. And it wasn't a coincidence that we chose the term instance as the foundational units of that. The vision was sort of that, or the notion was that the BibFrame instance, which maps fairly sort of well towards what we typically use a MARC record for, is a good way to capture the kinds of things that libraries collect and lend to patrons. So that for a lot of different operational needs, it felt like the right kind of thing to put in the middle. There was a vision early on that it would be joined by other members of the BibFrame family in a to-be-determined fashion. And I would say that the entity management working group in Folio has been sort of has been working on that concept ever since. And part of the challenge with it, and part of the reason that they are there in yellow and were not pursued early on, was that it was seen as not a deal breaker for those things not to be there, if that makes sense. That without a model within Folio itself to deal with work and agents and places and subjects, you could do an awful lot of things, especially if you do your primary cataloging someplace else. So it's the same reason that Folio, right out of the gate, didn't have authority management. And I think we can certainly discuss whether that was the right choice. I don't know that would have been my choice, but that was where things landed when people were sort of tallying up everything and trying to understand how we got to go live, right? Attached to those instances are really a more fleshed out notion of how you represent what the library holds, the actual inventory, than you would see in BibFrame, because this is used for actual work. This is used to meet operational needs. So we did have items and holdings in there, but we've also tried to put in, or we want to have in there at least, a representation of electronic items. There was a vision early on, there was a notion that we could get closer to bringing together the disparate universes of knowledge bases and catalogs in some kind of cohesive vision of inventory management. We aren't anywhere there. I think all of you who've worked in this field know that there are mechanical and cultural and traditional reasons why those things live separately. But I think a lot of us feel like it's not always practical that they live separately, and it would be desirable if they could meet each other better than they do. So trying to make room for that, at least, was part of that vision. So the other kind of hub that inventory is it's the place where quite a few different approaches to describing those instances can live, right? The idea was that the instance provides just enough metadata to meet operational needs in a comfortable way. But if you wanted a richer description, you would have a reference to a source record. And then the instance would be kind of a shadow or an abstraction or a slave in front of that. If you wanted to maintain or update that data, you would change that source record. This was me trying to the best of my ability to capture the sort of ecology of different descriptive models that I've seen in use around Folio up to this point. And I may have missed some, but I think it's quite interesting that, given the relatively short age of Folio today and the relatively low number of implementations, that we already are seeing a fairly rich universe of different potential schemes. The empty one here is meant to capture the notion that there are situations where you don't need a source record, where you don't need a more detailed description than what is in the instance record and inventory, and that's fine. You don't have to have one, right? So for certain types of materials, for certain types of libraries, even perhaps, that may be all you need. There are libraries all across Germany where the model is that all data is maintained in a separate catalog, where individual libraries go in, and when they're adding something to their collection, they add holdings to a record in a shared catalog for the whole region. And that data, thanks to the work of Charlotte, gets synchronized into Folio seamlessly, and it shows up in inventory. So the source of truth, in a sense, is outside of Folio itself, and you don't actually change or edit the detailed description within Folio. It happens someplace else. Many people are doing initial cataloging using OCLC connection, and then they use single record import to bring that in sort of a copy cataloging kind of mode, where there isn't necessarily a dynamic maintenance of the relationship over time. But that's one of the reasons that the project, for better or worse, got away with not having rich internal cataloging functionality, because many libraries use that capability. We'd all like not to be dependent on that. QuickMark is rapidly maturing and becoming a more fully functional MARC editing tool, right? Both with support for authority and just a more pleasant workflow. We even have in Sweden examples of libraries that actually use a shared national BibFrame-based catalog, and data gets synchronized into Folio, although it's sort of round trips, last I heard, through MARC to make that trip. The pink things are examples of evolving solutions to the problems of doing proper entity-based bibliographic description in Folio. And I think it's actually really cool, given where we started this conversation, that there are so many, there's sort of a flowering of different approaches to doing the same thing. And from my perspective, that is not just okay, that is really good and a sign of health of the Folio architecture, and a sign of how important BibFrame and entity management, in fact, is, that we are seeing different solutions. Because going back to the beginning, I think that the challenge with BibFrame for me, as I've looked at it evolving over the past 10 years, has been that there hasn't been a good answer to how those workflows work. How do we transition from cataloging to entity management? How do we share that work? What does it look like to share those things? And if we don't think that we will be sharing magnetic tapes full of BibFrame records with poor student workers in Denmark, what does it look like to deliver those things to patrons? What new value can be realized, right? So I think having a marketplace of idea and having a place for experimentation and different solutions tailored to different needs is exactly where Folio wants to be. So the three sort of main classes of solutions that I put up here are the work that's going on with the Library of Congress around MAVA, the work that's going on at the LD4 group around Sinopia, and then the work that's going on towards integrating Share-VDE with Folio and extending, growing Share-VDE with entity management functionality and beyond. And we're going to talk really primarily about that last one. And the reason that I'm excited about this work, and that I've been working with Casalini and with Andrea, is because from my perspective, the work that Share-VDE has done over the last few years is a really solid attempt to answer all of those three questions. So they have spent considerable effort on UX studies, actually working with Philip Jacobson, the guy behind the initial design of Folio, and Reshare as well, to try to conceptualize what a cataloger, what a librarian might need to engage in description in an entity management environment. So they've thought a lot about those workflows. They have thought about how they can enrich a patron experience, a discovery experience with links, with linked data in some sensible way. And in particular, what I'm excited about is that they have thought a lot about what the ecology might look like. Because from my perspective, I believe that when for linked data, for BibFrame, for entity management to really make sense as an alternative to what we've done before, it needs to have a model of sharing. Links have to point to someplace. Links have to have permanence out there. A model where libraries are maintaining metadata in their own silos and then publishing it to the world doesn't really give us shared entity management. It just gives us minting a bunch of new entities. So there's got to be some kind of model by which this data can be published and can live someplace so that we can link to it and maintain those entities over time. That requires infrastructure, and that requires like technology and addressing technical problems, but it also critically requires addressing issues of trust. If there has to be a shared entity that maintains, a shared organization that maintains these entities for us, many of us here, especially those of us based in the US, knows what happened when that type of organization or that type of legal entity gets too much power. And the aggregation of all of our metadata is inherently a thing that focuses an awful lot of power and money and energy in one place. And that becomes dangerous. I think it's really hard. It requires a lot of thought to put that kind of responsibility in the hands of anyone. So what I admire about what the Share community has done is that they've thought an awful lot about governance, and they've thought an awful lot about how the community of shareholders, of libraries that participate, can have co-ownership of what's essentially a hosted service. And that to me feels like a key innovation or key move forwards towards what is a credible approach to linked to shared entity management. So from my perspective, this integration work that Andrew is going to talk about is essentially kind of taking that vision of a cohesive approach to entity management that in the long run can be extended to encompass MARC-based cataloging as well, with a shared environment where there is an understanding of what it means to have trust and co-governance of a shared technology infrastructure. And then finally, how you deliver value to patrons based on that data. So that is why I think this is important and why we are working with these guys on trying to bring this to market for the folks that we run Folio for and for the whole Folio community as part of the larger discussion of like how do we get from copy cataloging to collaborative entity management. So with that, I'll pause if there are any questions, but otherwise I want to get to the meat of the matter.
What? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What a great introduction. Thank you very much. And let me.
And you should introduce yourself.
Yeah. I have also a slide for that.
Oh, I think I do.
So you said everything. This is the last slide. Questions. So, my name is Andrea Gazzarini. In this slide, I put few points, but yeah, just for mainly joking and saying who I am. I'm a software engineer. I'm a programmer. I used to be other things like architect, software architect, and things like that. But I love coding. Coding is a crucial part of my work. So I'm programming passionate. In 2010, I joined at Cult, and I started working in your domain, and specifically in the information retrieval field, because search is an important part of your domain. And in 2015, I wrote a book, Apache Solar Essentials, which is about Apache Solar. It's a popular and open source search engine. I'm being a programmer, I'm an Apache committer for a project called Cupid, which has nothing to do with a message-oriented middleware, but okay, it's an open source project. I know the open source world since 2003, I think. In 2017, I founded my company, which is very small. It's a software company called Spazio Codice. It's a compound word, code space, basically. And since 2017, I think, I'm the lead architect of Share-VDE. I'm leading the backend and the project, the project's development. And I'm actively contributing with code, of course. Husband and father, and as a passion, I am frustrated bass player and aspiring Chapman stick. Chapman stick is an instrument of is a custom instrument of a guy coming from Los Angeles, San Francisco, something like that. If you Google, you will see a lot of cool things that you can do. So this is the agenda, where the first part is related to what is Share-VDE, because, well, let's say from this talk perspective, the first part is a necessary evil, because I have to describe and illustrate what is Share-VDE behind the scenes, how the data is organized, and how we manage that. The second part is related to is the focus of the talk. So the folio integration, the considerations that we did in these couple of months, the challenges, the possible use cases, the crazy use cases that can be implemented using the operations that we can do on Share-VDE, and how we can imagine the corresponding counterpart on a system like Folio. And some options, integration options, the list is not exhaustive because this is the result of our considerations, but maybe based on your experience or your concrete usage of the Folio, of the Folio platform, maybe any suggestion is warmly welcome. The roadmap is actually the work that we are collecting, in terms of analysis, tickets in Jira and spikes, implementations, while we are proceeding with this analysis. So the first point is the Share-VDE initiative. As I said, I founded my company, Spazio Codice. Is possible to read here, but I'm here on behalf of Casalini Libri and @Cult, which are the two companies behind Share-VDE. And what is Share-VDE? It's basically Share-VDE stands for Share Virtual Discovery Environment. It's a library-driven initiative that puts together in a unique environment, in a single environment, the catalogs and the bibliographic data, bibliographic and authority records coming from a lot of relevant libraries from the America and North Europe. And we like to imagine Share-VDE like in the picture on the left. So in the center, we have Share-VDE and the inbound connections and outbound connections, respectively, on the left and on the right. So the question mark means that we try to make the system flexible and extensible, so we can, in time, plug in different sources, inbound and outbound. This talk focuses on one of them, which is Folio, that is on the left and on the side, on the right part. So a brief history, I'm not diving into each step, but Share-VDE is a young project, not so young, because it starts from in 2016. The first project was called Share Catalog, and it was a similar initiative. The consortia of libraries was composed only by Italian libraries. Most of them come from the south of Italy, and then starting from that idea, a new core born. And we call that Share-VDE. Share-VDE is actually the name of the project, but is also the name of the main consortia composed by the American and North Europe libraries. But we have also other consortia like depicted in the picture, another called PCC, which is still American libraries, Parsifal, which groups pontifical libraries in Rome, and the National Bibliography, where you can find the British Library. And all of these is what we call share family. And in this picture, you can see that there are a lot of things that are moving around Share-VDE. Share family, the term share family has been created for imagining this group of, we call them tenant, interacting and sharing data across them. It is an ongoing project, the Share Family Index. Sometimes you will hear something, this term, Share Family Index, which is a centralized index that allows intercommunication between different Share-VDE tenants. The Share-VDE knowledge base, what is it? Let's start with the data that we have in Share-VDE. And some basic concepts useful to understand how we manage that data, how we organize that data. Tenant and provenances. Share-VDE basically manages a knowledge base data that consists in clustered, integrated, and enriched entities. We will see the meaning of these three terms, sorry. In Share-VDE, a tenant is basically a set of institutions that contribute to the same knowledge base. That's why I was saying we have different tenants, because, for example, if you remember the slide, the history slide, we have the Share-VDE tenant, which groups a certain amount of libraries. Then we have Parsifal, which groups another set of libraries. These are two different tenants and therefore they have a different knowledge base. So they contribute with data, and then they form what we call, I didn't study Latin, so I never remember if it's sapienza or sapientia. So, okay, it means knowledge in Latin. So, and I Googled yesterday, so the memory is not my, yeah. Okay, in any case, it's a Share-VDE knowledge base. An institution within a tenant is called provenance. We use that term because we want always to retain the provenance, so the relationship between each Share-VDE entity and the institutions, the libraries that contributed to that entity. So the genesis, how is it created? We have the libraries within a given tenant that contribute with their data. This picture is intentionally generic. I wrote data because at this time we are managing MARC data, but the inbound connector framework is able to plug in additional formats, and we are working on the RDF, specifically with the data coming from Stanford, from Sinopia, which is provided in RDF, and there is a team which is working on the FOLIO instance. So just for saying that this data is intentionally generic because we want to have as many formats as possible. There is a step in the middle, which is a kind of pre-processing, because we do not take the data and put it in a, how to call it, a data lake. Data is pre-processed. There is a pre-processing where it assumes a different shape, and that's why I'm using this shape. We will see why. And this is the knowledge base. So on the other side, this is more or less the same picture, but just for illustrating that if a library provides a MARC record, and that MARC record or MARC records create 1, 2, 3, n entities on Share-VDE, we always retain the provenance. we always retain the provenance for the entity and for each property that of the entity. That means that for a given entity, we are able to know that it has been created by this record, this record, this record, this record, coming from this library, that library, and so on. But we have an additional level of granularity. So the entity, sorry, as you imagine, is composed by different properties. For each property, we know that the specific property, a title of a work, has been derived by the bibliographic record coming from the University of Alberta, and so on. So this is the knowledge base. What is inside the knowledge base? Share-VDE inherits and extends from BibFrame, from the BibFrame model. It's very similar. It's similar, but it's not the same. Specifically for the core entities, BibFrame, the blue entities depicted on the right, has three levels: work, instance, and item. And Share-VDE adds another level. Level is not a level, but okay, it's a kind of hierarchy called opus. Basically, we split the conceptual idea of a work from its expressions. Something that I'm not an expert on BibFrame and not a librarian, but basically these two concepts are grouped in the BibFrame work. We split that concept. The remaining part is basically the same. And as part of our Share-VDE working group, there is a Share-VDE working group that is defining a Share-VDE ontology by reusing and extending the BibFrame entities. For example, the opus is an entity that is only on the Share-VDE ontology. The remaining entities are directly inherited from the super ontology, from the BibFrame. And that's why the instance and the item, there is no description, because it's basically the same thing that we can find in BibFrame. We have other entities. There are a lot of entities in the Share-VDE data model. So this is a slide about the contributions and agents. And here, if you know the BibFrame data model, even roughly, you will see a lot of similarities. The contribution is an entity itself. It is basically a pair of an agent that in Share-VDE could be, agent is a the technical term is an abstract class, an abstract type that can be realized by 4 possible types: person, organization, family, and meeting. So a contribution pairs an agent with a role. The role is the relator code, basically the role that the specific agent has in that contribution. We have a complex mapping, better set of rules in Share-VDE that drive the association between the core entities and the contribution. What it means. For example, an agent, an organization, for example, that has a publisher role is a contribution that can be attached, that can be linked or associated only to an instance level. The author is a relationship and a role better of a contribution that can be associated only to an opus. The translator, for example, is something that can be associated only to a work. This is one, and we will talk about that. One of the differences with the Folio instance, where the contributions are attached to the instance entity, right? Because we are instead we are those rules that drive us to understand where a single contribution can be attached. There are roles that can be attached to multiple entities, like the author, if I remember. I don't remember exactly. I should have a look. So also the subjects are special meaning in Share-VDE, because the entities that we've seen in the previous slide are subclasses of a superclass called concept. So, and a subject is an ordered set of concepts. Ordered set because we need to maintain, if you think to the subject string, it is composed by several parts. In Share-VDE, each of them is a concept and can be implemented by a topic, a date, or even an opus, an agent. So if we have a subject string, history, Rome, I'm not a librarian, so probably the example is horrible, but history, Rome, 1972, in Share-VDE, this is a subject. Okay, the first green class. It is composed by 3 concepts, ordered concepts, because we want to retain the order of these 3 entities, and each of them is a Share-VDE entity. So the first could be, I don't know, a topic. The second, the history, Rome, a place, and the third could be a date. The subject is associated to a work, and the association has a qualification. So the subject itself is not a topical subject, a name subject, a geographical subject. That qualification is put on the, I don't know if here, on the relationship. So if we have a subject, we could reuse it in one work as a geographical subject, in another work as a topical subject. And with this design, every concept can be reused in other, with a different order maybe, in other subjects. And last, we have other, we call them non-core entities, like genre, type, language, format, place, availability, some other kind of entities that are not part of the model of BibFrame, but we introduced that entity for managing the data. For example, the opus type is a kind of qualification of different type of opuses, and this is itself an entity in the Share-VDE domain model. We talked about the knowledge base, then what is in the knowledge base in terms of relationships and types. Now we will focus on the single entity. How is it composed? And here comes, I think, the interesting part. So, in this example, a library, Stanford Libraries is using Stanford Library is using Folio is creating an instance, and that instance is sent to Share-VDE. The instance could be also a MARC record. That MARC record is processed. At the moment, this usually happens for a lot of data in a massive way, in a batch way. So all those records flow in Share-VDE. And you can imagine that if we have a different library, a lot of libraries that provide their data, there will be for sure a lot of intersections between data, because the Bible, I guess that most of libraries have a bibliographic description for the Bible, or for, I don't know, popular books. It comes to me only Italian books, the Divina Commedia, okay? And the same for the author. So popular author, the libraries had a description for most probably had a description for those popular agent or popular works. What happens when Share-VDE detects those intersections? It tries to deduplicate, cluster these entities. So if 4 libraries provide 4 descriptions potentially different of the Bible, we are at the end of the pre-processing phase, we won't have 4 entities. We will have just 1 entity. But this is the data coming from 1 library. So the data coming from 1 library will be stored. There is a bit of manipulation, but nothing important. And it will be stored in this transient form that I depicted with a triangle. As I said, a representation, a bibliographic representation of the same entity, what will be the same entity in Share-VDE, will be potentially provided by other library. So this is the description of Stanford, but there will be another library, for example, in University of Pennsylvania, that has a bibliographic description for the same entity. Share-VDE, in that pre-processing phase, is able to detect that and creates a similar shape. And the same for potentially the other libraries that contribute with their data. The sum of all these phases give us a prisma. Sorry, prisma is Italian. So where we have 1 entity and each phase represents the data contributed by a given library. And this is basically the Share-VDE entity. There is more in the data organization. Let's assume that the University of Alberta, on the left, provided this minimal bibliographic record about Alice in Wonderland with a title and a title alternative. Do not consider the author, which has been already worked. As you can see, there is no the literal form. There is a URI, but of course, the data coming from the library doesn't have the URI. This is set by Share-VDE. Then there is Stanford, which provides an exact equal representation. The Library of Congress provides a super minimal definition for that record, just the title. The 3 titles are the same. The National Library of Norway provides a different representation with a different title alternative. And that is the different data sources. There is another provenance, which is not a library. On the bottom, there is Share-VDE. Share-VDE is, in that pre-processing phase, the entity is enriched by adding external sources like DBpedia URI, Wikidata, or VIAF, ISNI, FAST, and so on. This is something that cannot be done by every source. This is done centrally in the pre-processing phase of Share-VDE. How we store the data? as you can see, we do not have, even if Alberta, Library of Congress, and Stanford provided 3 different representations with the same value for the title, of course, we do not store 3 times the title. Instead, we have an attribute value with the Alice in Wonderland title connected to the provenances, to the members that contributed with that data. This is valid for the attributes, which are basically properties in Share-VDE can be, we have 3 types of properties. The attributes, which are literals, text, numbers, Boolean, dates, and so on. Relationships, which are connections between 2 different Share-VDE entities. So, for example, Alice in Wonderland on the left and Lewis Carroll on the bottom. Relationships are managed in the same way. So in this case, the author relationships has been derived from the data coming from Alberta, Library of Congress, and Stanford. And in the middle, we have the links added by the Share-VDE process. The Share-VDE, we call it a clustering phase because we are doing that kind of clustering. It's not exactly a clustering, let's say, in the machine learning terms, but okay, we often call it clustering. We have the knowledge base. What kind of services we enable on that on that knowledge base? So still the big picture, this is the tenant, the main tenant, the Share-VDE tenants that provides data. And on top of the knowledge base, we provide search API. This has been the first step. I think we released the first version of the search API in 2019. Search API are available through 2 what is the term? Paradigm protocols. GraphQL, which is very popular, is a protocol open sourced by Facebook, and REST. There are advantages and drawbacks on both sides, but in general, the GraphQL API are more advanced and more flexible. On the other side, there are things that that are possible only using a REST approach. For example, if you want to ask for an entity, for a specific representation of an entity, I want to a given Share-VDE agent in RDF format. I want to do a search, and the results must be in MARC on one RDF format. This is possible using REST with the classic content negotiation procedures. In GraphQL is not possible because GraphQL deals only with JSON. The first client of, and if we have time, I can go in the browser. The first client of this API is the Share-VDE public portal, but any third-party client can use the API for, I don't know, integrating them in its application or do something. Sinopia is doing something I think it's in the analysis phase, but they asked us the documentation of the GraphQL API. They are public, yes or not. You need an API key, but it's just a matter of asking us, and you will be free to use and access the data. And this is the search part, the read-only part. Then there is the edit part, because we need to manage the entities at this time are automatically created. And we know that machines sometimes are not so good, especially when we are talking about massive amount of data. Sometimes in the MARC, you know, the descriptions are very, very problematic, depending on what is written inside. And so it's possible that some prism is, let's say, malformed, or in any case, should be edited, should be improved. For that reason, we implemented another set of API, the edit API, the management API, let's say, that are exposed only on GraphQL. The main client of that API is a sub-project of Share-VDE called JCricket. And it's a user interface that allows to edit the prisms in the knowledge base. And of course, being exposed through API, any third-party client can be use them. Of course, here the authorization is a little bit more rigid because you can manipulate the knowledge base. You can not delete, as we will see, but you can edit. You can do things that modify the knowledge base. So what are these, and this is important for the folio integration, what are the possible operations that you can do through the edit API? The first, that's why I say the management API, because otherwise confusing. Edit means that I have an entity with an attribute, with a relationship, with a links, which is wrong. And I want to change it. This is what we call edit. The second part is, the second operation is invalidate. We can invalidate an entity. We do not delete entities in the knowledge base because each entity gets assigned a URI, a persistent URI. So we do not want to delete and reuse URIs because otherwise it would be problematic. So the entity is marked as invalid. Is no longer searchable in the public portal, but the JCricket editor user can still manage it. And these are two operations that are a bit strange from a classical management viewpoint. The first is the merge. So the automatic pre-processing created n prisms that logically should be merged into one single entity. The JCricket editor can do that through this operation, which requires some special privileges. Because coming back to the edit, I'm a user. There is a prisms, and one phase is represents the data contributed by Stanford, okay? If I'm a JCricket basic editor, I can work only on the phase of my library. So if I'm a Stanford basic editor, I can work on that specific phase. The invalidate, the merge, and the last operation, the split, are an exception to this, because if I invalidate a prism, I'm invalidating all the phases of a prisms, so also data of other libraries. For that reason, invalidate, merge, and split are, which is the opposite of the merge, require advanced editing permissions. If we have time, then I will show you the user interface. I put some slides for an offline usage so you can see how it looks like. So basically, you enter in the JCricket in the Share-VDE portal, you log in as an editor, and then you can, on the detail page of a given entity, you can enter into JCricket that allows you depending on your role, basic or advanced editor, to execute the operations that we see in the previous slide. So rapidly here, this is still the same picture. So tenant contributes with the data to a knowledge base, then JCricket edits that knowledge base, applies some change. Every time Share-VDE, the system, let's say, detects a change occurred in a prism or even in a property of a prism, a change signal is sent to a special component called Chronos, which is a kind of service bus and that implements the publisher subscriber module. So that notification is spread to the registered listeners. The first listeners of this system is basically the knowledge base. The knowledge base is composed by different type of storage. The RDF store, which provides the RDF representations of the entities of the knowledge base. The RDBMS, which is the primary data storage used for management, for data management. And yeah, here I should have put inverted index, so it's too complicated. Solar is the search engine that provides the search service, full text search services. These are the first listeners of any change, because when, as a JCricket editor, you edit an entity, we need to apply that change to those three storages. But the same mechanism can be used also for notifying and implementing an outbound connector towards an external systems. And this is what we are doing with Folio. So detect the change and propagate. If the change is related to a member, to a property of an entity belonging to a provenance that uses Folio, then the change is propagated using, at the moment we are using the MIU mod inventory update. Okay, I hate acronyms, so it is. And for implementing total or partial updates on instances. During this work, we met some challenges not yet solved. The most part of them are not yet solved. So the first is, as you can imagine, the different domain model. We are dealing with two different systems. So excuse me if the left side is not exact, but I tried to summarize the differences that are relevant to me. So Folio is a microservices based and has a flexible, modular, and extensible domain model. So that means that more than one domain model is a set of interconnected micro domain models, depending on the modules that you install. So is able to capture a vast and extensible domain space. The domain model includes, as a consequence of that, bibliographic and non-bibliographic entities. The Share-VDE domain model, you should know at this point, is a bit different because introduces some entities that are, let's say, bibliographic, but are not in Folio. So everything is an entity. In Share-VDE, even a property value. So Alice in Wonderland is an attribute and with an identity. So we can give we give a URI to that specific property value instance. And entity are prisms, so they have different phases and are mainly created at the very beginning with that clustering process. And the domain model includes at 99% bibliographic entities. There is a pluggable mechanism where it's possible to add and implement API depending on the specific libraries, if the library wants to enable particular services on its phase. But I would say that is not part of the core. So here is a comparison, very minimalistic, because on the left there is Folio and it's not a complete Folio instance, but you know there is the instance and which has a publication where I think I forgot the name of the publisher name, but okay, we have the publisher name, the place, the date, and the role, distributor, and so on. Is attached to the instance as a separate entity. There is a contributor with those attributes, a name type and contributor type, which is basically the role, okay? In Share-VDE is a bit different, as we already saw. We have a hierarchy of core classes, everything is a prism, and the contribution is a pair of role and agent, which is an abstract class. Other than different classes, we have different properties, because on Folio we have an instance, right? With the with the properties. Those properties during the clustering process are split across the Share-VDE hierarchy. So specifically the uniform title is put at opus level because it's the title of the conceptual work, okay, the Bible. Then the title of the instance will be the title of the Share-VDE instance. The node will be is in the instance as well. Publisher is a role, as I said, associated to the instance. The author instead is a qualification of a contribution that we put at opus level because is related to the conceptual idea. And for example, the translator is instead a role associated to the work entity. So how we can address that? First, we implemented a mechanism for associating to each provenance a target system, one or more target systems, because we cannot know in advance that the library has just one system for providing us data. For example, Stanford, I know that has Folio and Sinopia. So both of them ideally could provide data to Share-VDE. When in Share-VDE I change an attribute of an entity that corresponds to a record coming from Sinopia, I must know that because I should propagate the change, I should propagate back the change to Sinopia, not to Folio, because probably that entity doesn't exist in Folio. And once we defined that association, we created as part of the Share-VDE dictionary a kind of reverse mapping for doing the opposite of what we saw in the previous slide. I have an attribute on Share-VDE, which is the corresponding, where does it go when it is changed on the original system? This allowed us to capture, till now at least, a lot of different use cases. But okay, if the source domain model is very, very different from the Share-VDE domain model, that things it's possible that it becomes tricky to configure. And this is another real challenge. We briefly talked about the invalidation, split, and the merge. These are unusual use cases in a system like Folio, which is, at least for instance, is record-based. If we have an entity that groups different contributions coming from different libraries, what happens when I split a phase? What happens when I invalidate a prism? Should I send a delete message to the source system? It's a challenge because that invalidation could be executed by an advanced editor that doesn't belong to my library. It's another editor on the opposite side of the world that deletes my instance. So should we propagate the change? Data consistency is the third challenge that we found. Of course, in a scenario where the communication is asynchronous, so data is changed asynchronously, it's very hard to maintain the consistency, especially if the communication is bidirectional and we want to have the same exact data on both sides. It's very hard. I would say impossible, but okay, nothing is impossible, but it's very, very, very hard. And why? Because on both sides, we have several users that are working in parallel on maybe insisting on the same data. And what happens? Who wins in case of conflicts? Trust me, it's very hard to maintain this consistency. That's why we invented the term eventual consistency. That's an elegant term that means we are not able to reach that goal. So some ways to mitigate this issue: solve or mitigate. Solve with asynchronous communication. So in case the single update, the single change application is so fast, we could even think to implement something synchronous. It's not, from an integration perspective, the term synchronous is a blasphemy, but sometimes if the actions that should be executed on one side or another is fast and it's reliable, it could be a good option. Otherwise, we could have near real-time inbound connectors for processing single events, single records, instead of receiving massive amount of data, and therefore implementing what is called stream clustering. In case a conflict is detected, probably as developers, usually we have a beautiful way to solve things that we are not able to solve. Put it configurable. So let the customer decide, do you want that or that? And the problem for me is gone. So probably one option could be also that. So let's decide in configuration, in case of conflict, who wins, which is the system that wins. Folio in this case, or the updates coming from Share-VDE. Again, this doesn't solve the problem. And coming back to the use case, so we already saw what is an editor. What I would like to add here is that Share-VDE is able to detect a change at property level. So we are able to send a signal when a single attribute changes, even when actually we are able to detect even a transient change. We implemented that for collaborative editing. You know, what you see in Google Docs. If me and you are writing on the same document, I see you that are changing something, are writing something on the same page. Share-VDE is able to detect that change or the change that the final change to an attribute. And this produces a signal. This produces a signal that is intercepted and published to the registered listeners. So this is the most plain use case, because a connector that knows the Folio language translates that change to an API call, a Folio API call, and Folio has a good partial update API provided by the MIU module. And we are able to partially update an instance, an item, an holdings using that approach. Oh, sorry, this is the same. In the message that we send, in the message that Share-VDE produces, implements a design pattern called memento, which is what's word? Basically, it includes the old value and the new value of the property, even for transient changes. This is useful because sometimes when we propagate the change back on the other side, we need to correlate that attribute, the new value of that attribute, with the old value, which was the value on the source system that I want to update. This is especially important on multi-valued properties. Imagine that on Folio side, there are an instance having 3 alternative titles, A, B, C, okay? In Share-VDE, they will have 3 different identifiers, http svt.org/1/tool/3. I changed the second one, which is B. A notification is sent. I change B to Z. If I do not have the previous value, how can I tell to Folio change the B value with Z? I don't know that the Z value that has been changed was B. In that way, with the old value, we are able to detect to correlate that value with the original if someone in the meantime didn't change that value. So that's why I'm saying that consistency is a challenge, is a critical challenge in these scenarios. Probably for the demo, I realized that it's too technical because I'm using API and so on. So yesterday, as a clairvoyant, I put in addition, the ports that I'm using are closed here. So I put the slides with the different steps. I prepared the different, and these URLs are public. The requests that I used in Folio for creating the instances, and the requests in Share-VDE for updating the attributes. What I have in Folio, 3 instances. One is the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 3 different instances. The first is in English, the other 2 are in French. When Folio sends these instances to Share-VDE, what happens? There is an opus, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which is the conceptual work. Then we have 2 works because we have 2 translations for that opus. And then below we have the 3 different instances, which roughly map the folio instances. If we move to the Share-VDE portal, this is the opus, where you can see on the below the 3 different instances. Actually, we do not use in the public portal the term instances. We use publication, which is a logical sum of the instance and the work. So we have 3 publications that corresponds to the 3 instances. But for example, the language property is something that is associated to the work, is a property of the work. Anyway, we have 3 instances, and of course, the opus and the 2 works and the 3 instances are not the only entities created. There is also the agent, Lewis Carroll, and also the publisher and so on, but I have no space. So this is the page of Lewis Carroll, where you can see here the opus related. So how can we enter in JCricket? The entry point is always the public portal, where you search some entity like Alice Adventure in Wonderland, and then you have to log in as an editor having editing capabilities, and then you can enter in JCricket. So there you can edit things according to your editing level. If you are an advanced editor, you can change even things related to other libraries. If you are a basic editor, you will see only your face. Okay, the editor changes something on Share-VDE. We are on Share-VDE, and Kronos propagates the changes to the change, in this case, to Folio, which I changed in the demo. I changed the title from English to Italian. Alice nel Paese delle Meraviglie is the Italian translation. And this is the simplest case of integration. Yeah, probably yes. It's very simple. There is a lot of work. Apart from this simplicity, there is a lot of work behind, a lot of work that is not directly related to the single attributes change, but to the whole infrastructure, the communication infrastructure, and so on. Probably there are other tricky use cases that we are going to address, we are going to study to address. These other use cases are those that pose a challenge. The invalidation, what should be propagated back to the source system? A delete? Yes or not? We could require, but the problem is that Folio and the external system is not under our control. So ideally, we should have a proposal API. Hey, I'd like to delete this. Please make note that I deleted this entity on my system. Do whatever you want. Which doesn't solve the consistency, because if you do not delete the entity on the source system, the 2 data store are different. The invalidation can be on directly if I invalidate a prism, or indirectly when I merge different things into one. The one is the result of the merge, the other are invalidated. So the merge is another strange use case where we are working at entity level, and it's hard to imagine the counterpart on a record-based system, and so the split part. So what should we send back? it's an open discussion. It's an open discussion, and probably we have to discuss and think about that. So last part is several integration scenario that we can think and we imagine for integrating Folio with JCricket. The first, this is basically what we've seen in the previous slides. JCricket that edits some data that corresponds to something that had been contributed by Folio, and the change is propagated back. So far, so good. Then the second is a JCricket native Folio app. This is I mean, the architecture is more or less the same. The advantage for an end user is that you have one single place where to work, access to Folio, and you will have the inventory application and JCricket application without relying on an external system. In that case, JCricket, we will talk through the GraphQL API, the Share-VDE GraphQL API, and the same flows will apply. This is a similar solution, but a JCricket++. So instead of talking with Share-VDE and asynchronously updates Folio, the JCricket application could use the inventory API for synchronously update the inventory and then synchronously update the Share-VDE knowledge base. This would solve the consistency issues because everything is synchronous.
No, time.
Yeah. Sorry that. And other two options are the way Folio could feed the data, record by record, instance by instance, implementing the so-called stream clustering, or by using what happens nowadays, using massive of or batch amounts of data periodically, or this is what happens at the very beginning, okay, when a library joins Share-VDE. Roadmap is not important. It's just a couple of slides where that I grabbed from Jira, where we are collecting. This is not definitive. We are collecting the work that we raise while we analyze the several tickets. This is my daughter. Today is her birthday, and this is the first birthday I miss. So it's kind of awful. And nothing. The last slide, Share Family, we are always looking for members, for contributors, for libraries that wants to join the initiative. We have a quite active Slack channel. So if you are interested on that, let me know, or use the addresses that are on the slides. And that's